Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Madam Chair. It's nice to meet you. My background is in education. It's an accountant and as a manufacturer, so it's in my DNA to go to root cause analysis, and I also like numbers. You mentioned earlier the 20, 30, 40-year outlook and how that's unsustainable from a debt to GDP ratio. Have you looked at just the dollar amounts of deficits that's going to be driving that debt?
You know, I guess I have. I often focus on what is the ratio of debt to GDP and
Right.
is it stable or rising, but
Well, one of the reasons I go to dollar deficits is something I think people can understand a little bit better. CBO seems to be kind of resistant to put their projections, so I've done it for them.
Okay.
They like percentage GDP, I like dollars, so their baseline projection over the next 30 years, and I think that's a pretty relevant time frame, we have that demographic bubble, shows $66 trillion of deficits. That's the baseline. The alternate fiscal scenario is $127 trillion of deficits. And let me just break that out by decade for the alternate fiscal scenario. It's $8 trillion the first decade, $31 trillion the second decade, $88 trillion the third decade. I mean, does that comport with basically what your understanding is of the unsustainable nature of our debt and deficit over the 30 years?
yes. I mean, my understanding of the core problem is that as the population ages, and of course it depends on the trend in healthcare costs relative to other prices in the economy as well, which had historically been one of rising relative
again, my point,
prices.
that's pretty accurate in terms of numbers I'm looking at, and that's completely unsustainable. By the way, my daughter just turned 31. That just kind of went by like that. So this isn't that far out in the future. We need to address this sooner rather than later. I want to hone in on Social Security. Whether you take a look at the trustees report or CBO, somewhere between 13 and 15 trillion dollars will be paid out in benefits that exceed the payroll tax over the next 30 years. Is that pretty much your understanding?
So I don't have those numbers at my
Well, that
fingertip,
seems about correct.
But eventually, that begins to occur.
Okay.
Sure, it
Because
comes to
I've been trying to get people, and I actually had a CBO director, Elmendorf, admit this, but I just want to ask you if you agree with this statement in an OMB publication talking about the trust fund. It says, these trust balances are assets of the program agencies and corresponding liabilities of the Treasury, netting to zero for the government as a whole. Do you agree with that assessment? In other words, you have 2.6 or 2.7, 2.8 trillion dollars of U.S. government bonds in the trust fund, but the Treasury has the offsetting liability. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so when you
So?
consolidate the books of the federal government, that nets to what?
Well, nets to zero.
Zero. So in the trust fund really has, to the government as a whole, has no value. Do you agree with that?
Well, I guess the way I look at it, what is the ratio of spending on programs like Social Security?
No, again, I want to
Medicare,
hone in on
Medicaid,
Social Security. I want a very simple answer. Social Security will pay out $15 trillion in benefits over the next 30 years, more than it takes in the payroll tax, and the trust fund has no value to the federal government. That's a correct statement, is it not?
Well, I know I wouldn't have phrased it exactly that way. I
Well,
mean,
that's the way I'm phrasing it, and I'm phrasing it correctly, am I not?
well, the government has essentially provided the Social Security Fund with IOUs that says that we will
Right,
make
asset
we will
offset
make
by
these
liability
payments,
negative.
and
Okay.
the rest of the government needs to come up with.
Let me move on to jobs. Do you agree with CBO's assessment that an increase in the minimum wage, the one proposed, would cost us jobs? Up to $1 million is what CBO estimates.
So I don't know what the exact number is.
But it will cost jobs.
Well, it will help individuals who benefit from a higher wage.
But
at
it'll
the
hurt individuals that
expense
don't have a
of-
job, correct?
It's likely to have some negative effect on
Okay.
jobs, and it's a question mark exactly how large that impact is, with different studies coming up
So
with different numbers.
with the Fed's dual mandate looking at trying to improve the employment situation, does the Fed ever consider the effect of its low interest rates, the incentive it creates for manufacturers to automate? Because I'm seeing that as I visit factories around Wisconsin, I am seeing functions that I never thought would be automated. For example, just a hand tow motor truck, automated. So now there's not a person that has to operate that anymore. It's just flying around the factory by itself or maneuvering. Do you consider the harmful impact of these very low interest rates on the incentives to automate and also reduce employment?
Well, those investments raise productivity, and in the long run, that's good for the economy. And there is no necessary, in order to have enough jobs in this economy to put people to work, we don't have to ask firms to avoid making investments that are profitable for them, that improve productivity. We need to expand demand in the economy so that there's enough economic activity, even if it's capital-intensive economic activity that creates jobs for people who want to work. So that's what we're trying to do.
My point is just the misallocation of capital being caused by the very low interest rates, but my time's up. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Nelson.